Welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm your host, Gleaves, Whitney. During our quarantine, we may not be able to journey beyond our homes, but that should not stop us from journeying beyond our minds. Today, we travel to the world created by Shakespeare's imagination. Now, a lot of us were exposed to his plays in high school and college, but as we've gotten older, perhaps we have come to appreciate Shakespeare even more. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to learn from a PhD who has also performed Shakespeare? Well, today's guest, Dr. Gregory Dykhouse, is the real deal. He teaches at Black River Public School in Holland, Michigan, and he knows his bard. One of his favorite plays is The Merchant of Venice, which has much to say that is relevant to our students and to our current economic distress. My conversation with Greg will go about 30 minutes, followed by questions from our viewers. Our goal is not to go longer than 45 minutes, so feel free to begin sending your questions right away using the Zoom toolbar to do so. Greg, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Good to see you, Gleaves.
Well, so how are your students at Black River adjusting to the remote learning?
Well, we are now 4 weeks dismissed from class, and of course, classes are closed for the rest of the academic year. And that's a tough question. I think the students, with their routine greatly disrupted, this is new for all of us. And it's not just schools closing, but of course it's compromised health for lots of people around the state. It's compromised employment and careers. And there's just a whole lot of unknown that we're asked to respond to right now. And I think anytime that our routine and the familiar is disrupted and changed, that's a challenge for all of us. And it's a challenge for young learners. I work primarily with ninth graders, and so they have enough of a challenge this year. They're beginning their high school program of study, and that brings about all kinds of anxieties. And when you lay this last month on top of that, it's really tough. But as teachers, we're trying to be comforting and supportive, and we're trying to help reinforce routine for students currently through online learning.
Well, we wish your entire community well as we go through this sequestering during the pandemic. Well, one of your favorite books to teach your students is Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice. And I would like to know when you first encountered the play.
Well, I read Shakespeare throughout high school and had a good experience. I read it through my university studies. And when Black River opened for the 1996-1997 academic year, the faculty was encouraged to read Shakespeare at each grade level. And after listening to what the English teachers wished to choose, I was very happy to see that Merchant of Venice was not chosen. And so I seized upon that for my history classes. One of the strong components of the play is Elizabethan England at the time of exploration, where we have lots of traveling along the oceans and trade, and joint stock companies are forming. And individuals are asking themselves, how can we amass enough capital so that we can invest in shipping and bring back goods from around the world? And I thought that was a fine element to bring into European history and world history courses. And so, yeah, I've been working with this play for many, many years, and I've enjoyed reading it with my students. And we usually begin the year with this play.
Well, speaking of Elizabethan England, please tell us about your background.
Yeah.
Your background there visually.
We're in a different time zone. We're about 5 hours ahead of you. But what you see here is the reconstructed Globe Theater. And I have not been to the spot. I was in London in 1995, and all you could see at this, 1993, and all you could see at the time was a large green wall surrounding this construction site. And when you read the placards, it said, you know, coming soon, the reconstructed Globe Theater. But now, of course, the theater has been open for many years, and you can, through online resources, you can watch plays, and you can attend these shows right now. So it's a wonderful resource for the people of London.
Thank you. And this is where The Merchant of Venice was presumably put on.
Yeah, we know very little about the early production history of this play. The play we think is written around 1596. The Globe Theater opens in 1599. So the early the production history is not all that clear to us, but we can still imagine the type of theaters that were available during this time or were shared similar features, and yeah, so we can kind of imagine the scenes being performed at the stage here behind me.
Well, you were talking about your students earlier and their struggles to adapt during this pandemic. This play speaks to student anxiety and concerns. How does it do so?
Well, it does so immediately when you begin to hear the play. And I think we want to think of these performances as events that we hear rather than view. We're so used to watching things today. We're watching something right now. But in Shakespeare's time, people went to listen to hear a play. And if you are in the theater, the first character to walk out is Antonio. He is our merchant of Venice. And listen to the opening lines. In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you. How I caught it, found it, came by it, what stuff 'tis made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. And such a want wit sadness makes of me, I have much ado to know myself. Now, Gleaves, if I may just put you on the spot for a minute, what do these lines say to you?
Well, melancholy can have many sources, and it could be, when you look at the context of the play, it could be unrequited love. It could be the frustrations that come when people are learning about themselves. This is what we do in the liberal arts. We realize that our melancholy arises sometimes when we do not understand ourselves, our reaction to other people and our environment as well as we want. And it could also be something about the economic conditions of the time or about the economic anxiety that this play is filled with. How did I do, Professor?
Well, I think you did very well, and I elicit similar comments from my students. I think this is a wonderful opening passage for a play because the audience now has this driving question of why is Antonio so sad? Is it economic? Is it love interest? It can be all of these things, and this gives us something to watch for and to listen for throughout the play. What makes Antonio tick and why is he so sad? I think this is very appropriate too for high school freshmen because I'm not saying that they're all sad, but certainly they're very anxious. They're beginning a very important program of study. And I tell the students up front, I don't know what you are going to be asked to know 4 years from now. Curricula, programs of studies at universities and colleges probably are going to be doing a lot of things in different ways 4 years from now. And I don't think teachers know exactly what that is. And I don't think parents know exactly what that is. And so I can understand if you're somewhat anxious beginning your high school studies. And so right away, I think we can identify with Antonio. And that can encourage kids to kind of watch his story. And what's really interesting is in Act 1, as it goes further, Antonio is surrounded by his friends, and his friends are concerned. They say, well, what's wrong? Is it money? Is it love? And he says, no, no, no. And then some of the buddies sort of shrug their shoulders and say, well, if it's none of these things, you really don't have much of a reason to be too sad or too anxious. And some of them skip off to dinner. Well, his best friend remains. His best friend is Bassanio. And Bassanio has a love interest. And Antonio does a very interesting thing. Rather than focus on his problems or his preoccupations, he turns to Bassanio and basically says, how can I help you? And this is a really cool passage. If you listen to the lines, I am to learn. Antonio basically is saying, even though I'm anxious, I'm not going to throw a pity party. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to try to figure out why I'm so anxious or why I'm so sad. I think this is a very constructive response to a feeling, to an emotion. And I think our young kids can do a lot with this.
The wisdom of great literature. Mm-hmm. Well, let's go in a similar vein through several passages. We have talked about this play before. We've talked about some of our favorite passages in it. Let's go next to Act 3, Scene 1, in which Shylock gives his famous oration where he says, "I am a Jew, hath not a Jew eyes," and so forth. Please give us the setting, the context for that. What's going on there in these famous lines?
Yeah, by this point in the play, Shylock has enacted a contract, and Antonio has borrowed 3,000 ducats. He has to pay it back in 3 months. And as a kicker on this contract, sort of at the end, Shylock says, let's just, I don't know, for fun, throw on the contract. If you don't pay me back, I'll be entitled to a pound of your flesh. And then there's quiet. This is not something that's typical of contracts. And we talk a little bit about what it's like to take out a mortgage at the bank. And ninth graders don't have any experience in this. And what we say is if you go to the bank and you ask for money, if the banker puts something like this into the contract, you should probably just quietly walk out. But Antonio seems to be very confident that his ships will come in, that he'll have money and he'll be liquid again. So he takes the contract. But it seems as though there are some problems, that maybe the ships won't be coming in. And a couple people turn to Shylock and they say, you really wouldn't go through with this, would you? You wouldn't take a pound of his flesh. And Shylock gives us this monologue, which is maybe the most recognizable portion. If you listen to what he says, hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in all the rest, we shall resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? My Christian example, revenge. The villainy that you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. When we present this passage to students, they see immediately the argument here that, yeah, why should some things apply to some groups of people and not others? Shylock's argument is, hey, I'm a person just like you. And yet it seems like some sections of society can get away with some items and I cannot. And that's not fair. And ninth graders are very quick to pick up on this notion of fairness. And they think immediately that Shylock has an airtight argument, that he is right. And immediately our sympathy goes to him. But as we think about this a little bit further, this is probably not a good argument. And this is not what it means to be human. This is basically a response that any other species would give. The animal world would give such a response. But within humanity, we are called to follow a different course. And so at this point, initially students might say, I feel for Shylock, but then over time they say, even though he seems to have a good argument, his argument is not one in support of humanity. And he will suffer for this. We need to rise and we need to be better than the other species. And Shylock is choosing not to do so in this passage.
Well, you unpacked a lot in 5 minutes. That's really a remarkable way of comparing us actually to very conventional morality and how we're called to be better than that. Well, what about, let's go now to another famous scene in Act 3, Scene 2, where Portia gives her talk about, oh, love, be moderate. What's the context there? What's she saying?
Yeah, what's going on in this scene is Portia, early in the play, has received news that her father has died. And now it's time for her to take a spouse. And she too is very anxious. She too is kind of bummed out. And the reason for that is she has to choose her future husband by a particular method. Her deceased father has willed that Portia lay out 3 boxes, one of gold, one of silver, and one of lead. And suitors are to come in and select the correct box. And when they select the correct box, they will be allowed to take Portia's hand in marriage. One of the boxes in gold, and there's an inscription saying, if you choose this box, you choose what everyone desires. The silver box is inscripted with, if you choose this box, you choose the box that everyone deserves. And then the leaden box has the inscription, if you choose this box, you are to hazard all you have. And so as these suitors come in, this is a big choice, right? Which one do I choose? I really want to marry Portia. She is so smart. She is so wealthy. She is so beautiful. She is basically the bachelorette. And that's what we have in these different scenes. And the scene that you refer to, her love, Bassanio, has arrived. But Bassanio must play this game. And she's hoping that he makes the right choice. And he's thinking, he's like Winnie the Pooh. He's kind of doing his think, trying to work this out. And Portia's saying, you don't have to choose right now. You can take your time. You can tarry a little bit. And as she's providing all this wonderful wisdom and advice, basically he turns to her and says, shut up, woman. I want to play the game. And Portia's responds, I think, with some anxiety, because she's like, oh no, he's going to be just like every other guy. He's going to choose the wrong one. And basically she says, well, if you're not going to listen to my good advice, maybe if we just let music play in this room, it might direct you to the correct choice. And sure enough, by taking some time and thinking things through, Bassanio, who's a little bit of a blockhead, chooses correctly. And as he's choosing, Portia offers these words, oh, love, be moderate. And to me, I tell my students, Shakespeare wrote a lot of words. I think these are the 4 most important words that Shakespeare wrote. Oh, love, be moderate. Because if we follow these words, we might be putting ourselves in a position to choose correctly. We might be denying ourselves of what we might choose, and we might try to be putting ourselves in this position where we can make the proper choice. And sure enough, Bassanio chooses correctly. And so I think it's very important to point out this passage and in these 4 words, and I am prepared for some reaction that can these 4 words be the most important. I have not found this. This is not part of any other scholarship. This is sort of my own finding. I'd like to have that argument, and I say, give me 4 other words that might be more important that Shakespeare wrote. But oh, love, be moderate, I think is a passage that we want our students to think about.
And of course, to the 9th grade mind, there's nothing moderate about love.
No. And we can be distracted by a great many things, but and it's wonderful. We should be swept away with these emotions. But there's more to this than being swept away. And that's why the let-in box turns out to be the correct box, because love is not just I win, but love becomes, oh, now I have to change to make this work out and to be successful. And that's what this is all about. How do we change ourselves within changing routine? That's what a match is. It's not about reaffirming who we are, but it's how are we willing to grow anew in our love for someone else.
Beautiful. If only all of us got, say, the prenuptial counseling that had that message in us. Okay, well, now let's go to Act 4, Scene 1, which I think presents one of the most powerful polarities in the play between, justice and mercy. And again, this is Portia and the quality of mercy talk, the speech. What do you do with that, Greg, in the classroom?
Yeah, again, this is just a wonderful, wonderful scene. This is the climactic scene, the court scene. Is Shylock going to get his pound of flesh? And he thinks he is. The law is on his side. If the judge rules against him, what's at risk here is all of Venetian society, because Venice is a society based on law and based on contract. And Shylock feels he has an airtight case. Well, who arrives? The lawyer for the defense. And it is Portia disguised as a male lawyer. So one of the really cool things here is the smartest person in the whole play is Portia, a woman. And I make sure that we point that out. I think this is Shakespeare's greatest character, a woman, based on what she does. And she turns to Shylock and she says, you have a good case here. But I'm going to ask you yet again, do you want the law or do you want mercy? And Shylock is insistent that he wants his contract. And then Portia gives us this wonderful monologue. And it's, I have to commit this to memory at some point. I've committed all these other ones to memory, but I'll have to read this to you. But listen to the words that she shares. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blessed him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein both sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above the sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show like us gods when mercy seasons justice. What do these words say? Kings and leaders. The Hauenstein Center is a center that develops leadership. What do we want to see in our leaders? It's not just a scepter. It's not just a crown. It's not just the power to rule. We want to see in our leaders mercy being enacted. And it's not just that we want to see mercy in our leaders, but we who are not leaders, we want to show mercy too, because when we show mercy, that is probably the action where we are most godlike. This is our demonstration of what is the right thing to do. And so mercy is the greatest thing that we can show. And she turns to Shylock and she says, do you want to show mercy? And of course, he denies her again. And from there, it's Shylock begins to lose. So this is a wonderful, wonderful monologue that students really like to talk about. What would you rather have, law or mercy? Do you want your teacher to follow the grades, or do you want your teacher to show mercy and every now and then? And then the ninth graders can say, yeah, I think mercy is probably a good thing. So.
Well, this is remarkable, especially in West Michigan. This is Ford country. And I can't help but think back on the quality of mercy that President Ford showed toward his predecessor, Richard Nixon, when Nixon left office, at death's doorstep. His physical health was so bad. But Ford was down on his knees in church trying to figure out how best to move the country forward. And it came down to a question between justice and mercy, and he chose mercy. And I think that was a tribute to Ford's great leadership. And I've never been able to establish the relationship between the Merchant of Venice particular passage and Ford's decision, but they certainly resonate.
That's a great comparison. Particularly if you think, as a historian will think, back in the day, this was not a popular decision that Ford made. And he was lampooned and ridiculed for this. And it's through revision, and when we look back now at Ford, we say, what a remarkable act of wisdom that he demonstrated here. Yeah, that's a very nice comparison.
As the John F. Kennedy Foundation said, it was a profile in courage, and it certainly was that. Well, Greg, let's move now to another great scene, Act 5, Scene 1, and this is Lorenzo speaking.
Yeah, Act 5, after Act 4, after the courtroom scene and Shylock loses, basically we sort of think, well, the play's over. What else do we need to have here? Act 5 consists of one scene. It's in Belmont, and eventually all the characters are going to come back to Belmont, and we're going to have our resolution here. And some people look at it as a throwaway scene, and there's a little caution there because there's this beautiful passage where Lorenzo is looking at his love, Jessica. Jessica is the daughter of Shylock, and she's left Shylock. And the two of them are watching over Belmont until Portia returns. And they're sitting here under the stars. It's a beautiful night. And they say, when you think through history, all of the great lovers and demonstrations of love and caring, and they go through history, they go through mythology, and they name all of these. And Lorenzo does something very sweet. He turns to Jessica and he says, and I'm just really fortunate because I have you here with me, Jessica. It's such a tender scene. But there's this wisdom that Lorenzo gives us. And Lorenzo really is a nobody. He's not an important person, but the words that he offers here, I used to think that this talked only about music. And there's a lot about music in this passage, but I think it's about much more than just music. The passage, and there's some masculine words here, man, but this applies to everyone. Lorenzo shares, the man that hath no music in himself, nor is not moved with concords of sweet sounds, is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. The motions of his spirit are dark as night, his affections dull as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted. Mark the music. Now, if I was a music teacher, I would take that and put that on every t-shirt and make sure all of my musicians were wearing that because it sounds like such an affirmation that we should learn music. But what is being said right here? We can do pretty well in our daily life, but we will grow and learn when we are willing to open ourselves up to other ideas, other suggestions. We look for those opportunities to become better than we might otherwise be without this help, without this assistance. And this is such an important passage to consider. We can't do everything all the time by ourselves. We need to open ourselves up to that good counsel, to that good advice, and the types of emphasis that we get from works such as Merchant of Venice, or last week from the Odyssey. We can become better people. And this is what learning and growing is all about. We can become better people when we open ourselves up to something new.
Thank you. That is a wonderful explication of the music. And I remember in college I read Troilus and Cressida, and there was a passage in there about the music of the spheres and the harmony of music. And I think that you're alluding to that as well as I listen to you. We got some questions coming in, Greg, and I'm just fascinated. I think this will be our youngest viewer that has submitted a question from Matthew, and he's from Hudson, Ohio. And he's asking you, what would be the best first Shakespeare play for a 9-year-old?
For a
Don't you love
nine,
it?
well, I'd have to ask my daughters and try to go back in time. I know a play that we had some success with. Twelfth Night seemed to capture the attention and imagination of young learners. And there's so many wonderful vehicles that you can work with. But Twelfth Night, Matthew, might be a really good choice for you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Matthew, I hope to hear from you how 12th Night goes for you. Okay, here's a question from an anonymous attendee. How will the closing of the school this year affect the curriculum for students coming into a new grade next year? Will works of Shakespeare, such as The Merchant of Venice, be cut, or will they be emphasized even more?
Yeah, the reality is we have 10, 12 weeks where we're not meeting face to face with students. And this is one of the discussion points that teachers are exchanging right now is, how do we think about material that we're perhaps not covering? I know in my case, the 20th century has taken a big hit. And, specifically with Shakespeare, I intend to launch next year with Merchant of Venice, again at the beginning of the year. I think this is a very important work to read at the beginning of the 8th grade for the reasons that we've identified. One of the things that we're doing right now with online learning, I've directed kids to consider Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, and I've given them some material that they can work with. And then we use the opening, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And without doing spoiler alerts, I try to have students identify how might that be a good passage to think about what we're going through and experiencing today. And the responses that I've gotten from these young learners are just really, really cool. They're talking about, we have all these wonderful blessings, but at the same time, we have these challenges. And perhaps this is what Dickens is getting at in Tale of Two Cities. So we're trying our best not to, the humanities, I think, will not be compromised. I think something like math and foreign language takes a harder hit because you have some objectives here that you're not covering as intentionally as you would otherwise.
We've got a question from Aaron. He asks, at times the Merchant of Venice is blatantly anti-Semitic, but also buried within it, as you pointed out, are more tolerant messages, such as the Shylock monologue. How do you navigate this dichotomy in class?
This play is labeled a problematic play for the reason that Aaron shares here. Today, we think a lot differently about diversity than was the case during Elizabethan England. If we went back to Elizabethan England 400 years ago, what would we see? We would see a very homogenous society. We would not see an anti-Semitic society. I do not find enough evidence to suggest that Shakespeare would be an anti-Semitic writer. I don't think it's there. Different times existed. And I know that when we produce the play today, we have to prepare ourselves for such responses. And they're important to address. They're there. But I think if we treat this play historically, I think it's these other issues that will become emphasized. In fact, the Christians don't all come out well in this play. In the court scene, Asciano, who's one of the friends of Antonio, does not show real good Christian morality because he's very excited that Shylock will be punished, maybe even executed. And that does not show well for Christianity.
What do we know about Shakespeare's personal religious beliefs?
We know very little about Shakespeare. We know so much about his plays, but we don't know what made him tick. We just don't have that information. And there's probably no individual in history that we talk about so freely and so often without knowing a lot of strong details. We know that there was a suspicion of Catholicism during his time, and that would be an angle that we would develop. There's a lot of Protestant messages that his plays seem to be advocating. I suppose the context would be one: Elizabethan England is suspicious of papacy and more willing to embrace Protestantism. Queen Elizabeth herself could not tip her hand. She had to walk right down the middle. And that was a big challenge for her as a leader in her day.
So Shakespeare, you're suggesting, had to live very carefully. He had to write very carefully.
I think so, and I think artists do that. They have a license, and they can present some things on stage and let them play out. But I don't find the messages in Merchant of Venice ambiguous. I think when we look at, it's important for us to learn why we're sad, why we're anxious, particularly today. It's important for us to think of things bigger than ourselves. Mercy might be more important than the law. And then, of course, allow music into your life. Allow other things into your life that will help you make decisions that will make a quality of life for you and those around you.
That actually segues to another question. Anonymous asks, you've spoken a lot of anxiety within the characters. What lessons of coping with and overcoming anxiety can we take from this play, as many of us, students and adults, feel overcome with anxiety in these uncertain times?
Yeah. If the driving question is, why is Antonio so sad? How does he end up at the end of the play? At the end of the play, you have three couples. You have Portia and Bassanio, you have Lorenzo and Jessica, and you have Graciano and Nerissa, who's a maid to Portia. You have three happy couples. But then you have a seventh character on stage. You have Antonio, who doesn't seem to have a partner. And the message that he gets at the end of the play is his ships, in fact, did come in. So he is solvent and he has money. And so even at the end, Antonio seems to have weathered this uncertainty of his capital coming back in. We have to do the best to understand our anxieties, and it comes right out in these opening lines. I am to learn. I'm not going to throw a pity party. I'm not going to isolate myself in an unhealthy way. We are all isolating ourselves right now, but the healthy way would be to find ways to connect with others. And this is just one wonderful resource that the Hauenstein Center is providing. This is our attempt to connect with others at great distances. This is what we do. This is what humans do. We need to connect, but we can't isolate ourselves and say, oh, woe is me. I'm going to strike out at others. That is the error of Shylock's ways. He chooses to strike out. He does not deal with anxiety in a human way.
Thank you, by the way, for the plug for the Hauenstein Center. I really appreciate that. Greg, is there anything else you would like to say about this play that you think is absolutely essential to understanding ourselves as humans in times of economic anxiety or anything else?
Well, the one thing I'll say is I've enjoyed reading this play for now 24 years, and I get great relish when I can walk down the halls of the school and I can look at former students and I can point to them and say, what is the opening line to Merchant of Venice? And they know it. And maybe in ninth grade, they could not articulate the importance, and maybe it was very confusing. But what I find is students are willing to say, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And we direct the kids to continue to think about this over 4 years. And I get a great deal of satisfaction. And I'd like to see how kids attempt to compare this play to other topics that they're currently studying in their curriculum. This is a play that sticks. This is a play that young students can work well with. And it's a play that can help them grow. There's so many lessons here to teach, and it's wonderful that we get to work with such wonderful material.
What's your next favorite play by Shakespeare?
I think that's it depends on what's going on in the community. I know Grand Valley does a wonderful job in the fall of hosting a Shakespeare festival. And over the years, we'll bring our students to the festival, and I'd like to see what the local universities, what the local colleges are staging, and allow that to make choices. I suppose one that I've read with students over the years that I really like, and if you wish to connect it to the gravity of the hashtag #MeToo movement, Measure for Measure provides a lot of the same problematic questions as Merchant of Venice does, and I'm very intrigued with that play, and students have responded very well to Measure for Measure as well.
Very good. Well, thank you, Dr. Dykhouse, for sharing your love of Shakespeare and inspiring our listeners. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you this afternoon. Join us the same time next Thursday when my guest will be Nate Gillespie. Nate is a 2015 alumnus of our Peter C. Cook Leadership Academy. He will tell us about an inspiring civic effort he is spearheading to help our community deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Till Thursday at 1 p.m. Stay tuned and stay well. Thanks for watching.